The Frankie Files. If you would like information on cults in the news, please join my new Substack, frankietees.substack.com. Trigger warning. Some people may find topics discussed in this episode difficult. Please proceed with caution. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 18 of The Frankie Files. I'm Frankie Tees. Well, May has 5 Tuesdays, and as promised, I have a very, very special guest. Her book impacted me so much. She's knowledgeable about 2 different cults because she lived through both of their belief systems. Let me tell you what she's about. There's a lot to tell for her young age. She's from Generation Y. Daniella is an author, speaker, a group behavior specialist, a veteran, a cult survivor, a mother, and as she says, a human. Daniella was born a 3rd-generation member of the infamous Children of God religious cult. Trafficked around the world, moving to America and escaping at age 15. She graduated as college valedictorian and went into the U.S. Army as an intelligence officer. She deployed twice to Afghanistan in 2011 and 2014. She was on the Army's first female engagement teams, an experiment which led to the repeal of the women combat ban, historical stuff. She was 101st Unit, famous for the film Band of Brothers, a recipient of the Presidential Volunteer Service Award from Obama. Yep, she's been to the White House. She's currently pursuing a Master of Arts in Organizational Psychology at the Harvard Extension School. Her upcoming memoir release is called Uncultured. And as she says in the book, you can't say culture without the word cult. Point taken. Her name is pronounced Daniella. You can view more about Daniella at uncultureyourself.com, and I recommend that you do. I'm incredibly pleased to introduce to you Daniella Mestyanek Young. Good morning, Daniella.
Hi, Frankie. Thanks so much for having me.
So excited. Well, I couldn't be speaking to someone more opposite than me. We both survived a cult, but you went into total corporate organized military after your experience and school, and I went into stripping. So total stage / burlesque and entertainment. But I'm really pleased to speak to you on my new podcast. You're the first guest, technically because my mom was the first guest, but you're the first non-family guest. The honor is truly mine today.
Oh, well, thank you so much. We might not have as little in common as you think, because I did put myself through college waiting tables at like a little shorts restaurant. And
Shorts. I got you.
And we have to do whatever we can to make money. And a lot of times that means using your body.
Sadly, when you've already been exploited, it isn't that hard.
Exactly correct.
I find 3 categories of cult survivors. 1, those who people were born into a cult. 2, those of us who were taken pre-teen to a cult by our family. And 3, those who were over teen, puberty age, and went to a cult on their own or with their family.
But also, I would say the 4th category is children whose parents were born in the cult.
Now, I want to tell people that I've read the advanced copy of the memoir, Uncultured. It's not out yet. It's going to be released September 2022 by St. Martin's Press. And people can pre-order it now. Please, listeners, get my hint and go do so. My review, as a cult survivor, I found Uncultured gripping, moving. And I cried. I cheered for you till the very last intense paragraph. It took courage to live the life you have so far. And it takes courage to conquer the years-long negative programming you endured. It's riveting to follow the details as one person seeks to live beyond their fate, set by a destructive religious cult, sex cult. Congratulations on this powerful work of nonfiction and on your new life.
Thank you so much, Frankie. I think it's pretty incredible where I am today and how much I love my life and still how hard it was to write this book. And I got lucky that I had a wonderful team.
What's your publishing experience like? How did you meet your literary agent?
So I'll start by saying, I always kind of knew I was going to write a book, but I didn't really know what book I wanted to write. And in 2018, I read this book called Educated that was a memoir, but so much more, right? Okay, that's the model. That's what I got to do. So everyone laughs at you when you say you're going to write the next Educated. But I set a plan and I started reverse engineering, and I realized that I needed to get an article that was splashy and that got interest and that showed the range of the story, right? So basically I had to do in 3,000 words what I did eventually in the whole book of Uncultured. So I joined different networking groups for writers. One of them, an editor put a call for pitches from a magazine called Narratively. She wanted a story she'd never heard before or a new twist on a story everyone tells. So my pitch was, what about Americans cheering on 9/11, right? Then I'm going to show you the parallels. So, when my people are cheering on 9/11, I'm like, maybe this is not right. But 10 years later, in a military situation, I also had the same experience. Maybe this is all, programming and messaging. So I wrote that article and it got published, and it was 4 days later, I got an agent, called me and wanted to sign me on the spot. And that was the only interest I had from that. But it got me in with a pretty big agency in New York. And then from there, I would say a lot of the rest of it was timing, that cults are in the zeitgeist right now because of everything that's going on in the world, right? All of the extremism, what I like to call the culting of America. I had an agent, I had an idea, but I knew I wasn't that it would take me 10 years to write a really good memoir like Educated. And I knew I needed to do it in 2 because I was watching a cult leader run the country. And that, to tie this back in both to the writing, because I think sometimes when people try to write about closed off group experiences, they just give you too much. They brain dump. It takes you 6 months to get onboarded into the military. So you can't dump that on someone in a 300-page book. And so working with 2 women eventually that helped me write the book, that had no familiarity with this cult or the military, but were, great writers and storytellers, was a really interesting way, first of all, to write a great story, but also to sort of unlock myself and deal with my own disassociation and get emotions onto the page that in a way that I think ended up being very healing for me.
Oh, I can only imagine it was cathartic. But so they were your first audience that would be peering into a child born into a cult.
Yes, and that's actually exactly how I describe it, right? We've all had that experience where you read a book and you want to ask the author questions for just 10 hours.
Yeah.
And they would be the ones to do exactly what you said. Tell me more here. Right. There's a great line in the prologue that says, I was born a soldier. And I did not write that line. I wrote 2 or 3 or 4 very wordy paragraphs comparing what you're saying, that you were born a soldier.
She helped you hone it into a public consumable.
Translate our experience into normal people speak, kind of.
And that's something I'm going to get into a lot later, because I think there is definitely a learning curve on how to communicate what we've got to say.
Oh, yeah.
Is hard. It's hard because we have our language that we were programmed with, and we were just this is so wrong. And people want to know, well, what was wrong specifically? And then you go, well, let me tell you. And they're like, wait, that's too much.
Yes. To find a therapist that didn't want to just hug me and cry.
Okay.
Because Even
Right.
people that have studied stuff, sometimes don't know how to deal with what we've been through.
You've been through a lot of trauma. Well, another point I wanted to make sure and cover is your lieutenant colonel seemed to be really a champion of your telling your story. Was he an influence?
He was definitely an influence. So Lieutenant Colonel Scott Halter was really, I think, other than one lieutenant I worked with in the military who did not survive. And then when I get to
John.
Yes. And then when I get to start working for Colonel Halter, it's like, this is probably only the second time in my life that I've kind of seen good leadership and a man who's just, is sort of that transformational leader. And he was the one to tell me when I was getting out of the military, not only did he help me, which is something that is not that common. Usually once you say you want to leave the Army, you're like dead to the leadership.
Right.
And he stayed connected. He tried to help me, but he also told me like, hey, write about everything. Right. He found out about my background because we all went through some hard times together. And he told me to write about all of it. There's something to this. I talk about it at the end of Uncultured, who was like, find this thread. There's some connection. And to your point, Frankie, I had to learn to talk about it, right? I had to learn. I grew up in a sex cult, so I know a lot about group behavior. People think they're crazy. Show that. Well, I'm, new to speaking out as well, but 35 years it's taken me. Okay. To decide, because I want to do, like you said, just go on with my life, just figure out what I want to do, just put it behind me. It doesn't always work that way. You got to heal. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. I've lost family members over writing this book, right? They are still closeted. For me, it was literally killing me, right? Because the thing people don't understand when you grow up without a childhood in the way that we did is that the most dangerous things, the things that will always get you, is the things you don't know you don't know. I'm trying to hide my whole background and be a professional. It was killing me to not speak out. A girl that after high school went off to the military, but nobody knows what happens to the Daughters of America after they disappear behind the high commune walls. The high commune walls, huh?
The Frankie Files. Cults, Mind Control, and Sexuality in Society by Frankie Files. Well, you mentioned the high school experience. Not many people go to high school and say at administration, you don't exist.
Yeah, boy, high school.
And then you went to college. You were already interested in learning, which had been restricted by the cult. What did you major in? And was it University of Texas? Was it UT?
University of Texas at Dallas. Just got to go back last week and do the commencement speech there, which was, so I majored in literature.
Okay, got it. That shows, in your writing.
It really was a thing for me that I didn't know what else to do, and I couldn't do. In high school, I struggled just, when you're dropped in at 16, right? Just to get through the basic maths, the basic science. So I knew that wasn't really an option for me. And I ended up at a computer science school, but they had a great liberal arts program. Literature teaches you about the world. So it was my way, studying literature and history was my way of teaching myself about the world while I was still in this kind of warm embrace of a college.
Being surrounded by your peers for the first time and just feeling so alien. A lot of people don't understand the culture shock we go through. And you did a great job in those chapters of explaining, like, you're surrounded by college kids. You totally put on the face and fit in. You did. In your life.
Yeah. And I think so much about that now, because that was one of the things I realized as I was writing Uncultured. And actually, the chapter where I'm in college was the hardest chapter for me to write emotionally. So interesting. That was where I kind of sort of had this moment to choose to be myself and go out into the world, into the unknown. And instead, I chose a toxic man, and I chose the military, and I chose to start putting on these, like, what I call armor now, right? Like these different personalities. Yes. Wasn't until, you know, I'm writing Uncultured, I'm getting a master's in group dynamics, organizational psychology, and I'm studying social identity theory, right? Which is group identity. And it hits me that, oh my God, I'm in my 30s and I've never developed a personal identity. Cults, they take that away from you. And you know this. It was easy for me to go perform the role of the straight A student.
To interject and piggyback on that, forced to be in the group and comply, but also forced confessions that are not necessarily true. Whatever gets the group attention back off of you at that critical moment when they punish us for thinking for ourselves. The only time you get to focus on yourself is when you did something wrong to them. And that's insane. No personal development whatsoever.
Yeah, that's absolutely right? That whole like critique, tear down, build back up.
Yeah.
Right? You have to sublimate yourself for the group. Even just the way you said it there, like even when I joined the Army, I was like, all right, I will be the fastest girl running.
Right.
And that will get only one kind of attention on me and all the rest of the attention off of me.
Whatever works.
Yeah.
And that mindset, that group think, like you said, you see it around in the world. It's hard for us not to see it in play. Like, wow, look at these people confessing anything that agrees with the propaganda. Look at everyone falling in line. It is shocking to see it played out. It's like, so wait a minute, there's something to this whole dynamic.
Yes.
And I want to get into the military now, since you brought it up already, and the running. How did your leg heal so good that you can be such a runner? You can run a 5-minute, 15-second mile, not a 6-minute mile? That's insane.
So I laughed when I saw this question, because this is where the military starts sounding really culty, because the military recruiters will coach you to lie to the military entrance processing facility.
Oh, no.
And of course, it's not like I had any medical records anyways, right? You know, we didn't even get to, you've had a leg broken. They were like, in the interview preparing me, they're like, have you ever taken Tylenol for anything? And I'm like, yes. They're like, don't say that. Yeah, so it's Uncultured, right? We have this theory, doctrine called deceivers yet true, when it's like a good thing to lie for the group. And, you know, before you even get in the military, you're being coached on that.
How about that?
Healthcare.
How about that? So they want you to get in, so they tell you to hide your past. So it never even came out.
Bodies. You know, there's a very interesting parallel that I found between the way medical care was demonized in the cults, but it's also mental and physical health care is very demonized in like military organizations. I actually think it comes down to when you're in these total control groups, group is always more important than the individual. But by definition, medical care is putting yourself individual first. That's one of those organizational dynamics that I think is really hard to get around. Mission-focused groups.
Wow. So you were already, basically, if you kept your cult mentality, you fit in perfect to the Army. Put yourself aside, push.
So easy. Yeah.
20-hour days.
So many of us leave cults and go into the military because it's literally all through basic training when all of my counterparts are just horrified with how hard and terrible this is. To me, this is just easy. I was afraid of was I was going to snap to attention. I called the drill sergeant uncle instead of drill sergeant. Right?
Oh, shoot.
Not that for
oh, my Lord.
Or whatever.
And that's you're blowing me away. When you were in Children of God, and we'll get into a lot more detail about Children of God later, but they use the term being a soldier in God's end time army. Do you think that really stuck with you and was kind of why you were attracted to the military? Is this too on the nose?
Yes. So David Berg, our prophet, had like washed out of the military. He actually did pattern this very much after like a militaristic setup. So the whole Children of God, right, was 10,000 people all over the world. You would get moved around by leadership.
Right.
All of these things
deployed.
Similar to the army, yes. You would get deployed for missions, for the need of the group. We called when the adults got days off. It was called R&R.
No way.
Yeah, and we never got to stockpiling weapons, probably because we went international instead of staying in the U.S. Yeah. But we did battle drills and battle training, right? Like that was our main focus of our play, was where like American kids played bad guys, cops or robbers, whatever. We would play Heaven's Girl, which is us running away from the Antichrist forces. And, we talk about it now. And like, we were all just growing up being taught that we were going to, die as martyrs in fire by the age of 10 or 12. And it's like, how different is that from being a soldier, knowing that you're going to go off to war and potentially die?
Okay. Oh, the cult I was in also used the doomsday threat constantly. If you leave, it'll be spiritual death. If you aren't here when the world ends, you won't ascend into heaven / the spaceship. As the Morning Land cult was the place I was raised. And so when I started doing this research, it blew me away that the doomsday thing has been around forever.
And fear specifically of what happens after death, right? Because nobody can prove that.
Absolutely.
And I think that even that, right, if you think the context of religion and then you think about soldiers, well, like all humans want to be immortal, and soldiers who die for their country are immortal, right? They live
It's
forever.
Very attractive.
So when you have a transcendental mission, it's very easy to motivate large groups of humans to follow you.
Well said. Now, another thing I wanted to quote from the book regarding the army days. You said, good uncles uphold the system that abuses us. I'll tell you, that's one of the times I closed it and cried. The scene in your deployment where you're surrounded by uncles making a decision about your future career, that it's so powerful. It's so much like what you experienced in your youth. They had everything to do with deciding your fate. When it finally, in this moment, which I won't give away too much, but you had I don't know what you call it, a realization or an outing by default about your past and the irony of the situation you went through in the military and what you had experienced. It was not lost on me. You say maybe the way out of this was through. Please explain.
Yeah. So, first when we talk about the good uncles, right? And I think in the book you have examples of them. One of them is my stepfather. Then you have examples in the army of these are good men. And the reason this is important is because, of course, people have a really hard time seeing their extreme belief systems, whether that's racism, sexism, cult think, whatever, because they're like, I can't be a racist. I'm a good person. Right. And so when I am looking at the system, right, even my grandfather is one of those men that, we don't have reports of him raping and beating children, but he was in the leadership for 50 years. And the only reason his daughter was born in the group and impregnated at 14 and that I was born in the cult was because he joined the system and then stayed in it. Right. Yes. And of course, when we get to the military side, right, now we're looking at women in the military essentially as an oppressed class, right? Because we're such a small number and we were kept second class with the combat ban. We literally were told we weren't good enough for certain things. Yeah. So you have these good uncles, right? These good men, these leaders that I love, but they're still unable to help the individual.
Absolutely.
And I recently actually asked Scott Halter, Lieutenant Colonel Scott Halter, who's Colonel Scott Halter now, if he thinks that an organization can ever put the needs of the individual first. And he thinks it would be pretty impossible.
It's built otherwise.
Human beings created systems and organizations to be stronger than the individual. That's the whole point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Strength in numbers, we're stronger in groups. And the Army song that we chant every day literally says, the Army goes rolling along. This brings me to this moment, of course, where, you know, the climax of the book, again, I've been through everything before I even got to the military, and then I've been through everything in the military, and still it's not enough. These group of men are going to decide my fate.
Yeah.
And I had this moment, you know, I've since found out it's called the glass cliff, where women just leave the workforce they're in because breaking the glass ceiling is just too hard. As I say in Uncultured, you know, we're trying to not bleed to death from the shards of glass from the glass ceilings we've shattered. I just have this moment where I realize, like, not only is it too much maybe for anyone, but for me, I've put myself back in this situation where all of the power is out of my hands. And in doing so, I also was avoiding my own life and my own triggers and playing this men's game for so long, but it still wasn't working. And so, you know, when I am at the peak of my professional success and I'm falling apart, that maybe the only way out is through, right? Like, that's me realizing, as I think so many of us cult babies or trauma survivors in general go through, that, like, there is no option to just put it all behind you.
Damn it.
If you think of, like, if you're swimming in the ocean and a giant wave comes, the best thing you can do is just face it head on and dive into it.
That's right.
And come up the other side.
And you did.
The Frankie Files. Cults, Mind Control, and Sexuality in Society by Frankie Tees.
And you triumphantly articulated that moment that we all try to avoid, to be honest. It's like you just want to be anything other than talking about this, but then you realize you can help others by talking about it. So it's really important. And this is part of the thing that I believe is that this propaganda to shut up the rest of our lives helps cults continue. And we have to break that.
Yes. And one of the things I want to say about that is, you know, I actually didn't, my why for pulling the trigger on doing this book and not my whole life wasn't actually related to the cult. It was related to the Army. This woman, this low-ranking Mexican-American soldier named Vanessa Guillen was murdered. She disappeared. They didn't look for her. And
yes.
I will never forget, I'm sitting in the dark in my house, super triggered. And I'm like, why won't they stop killing us, right? Raping us, beating us, killing us. Yes. And I had that realization that it's the parallels of kids in a cult and women in the military. Somebody is going to have to tell their story, bleed their soul onto the table, and not care about the blowback from the group, which is really hard for military women. And I was like, somebody is going to have to tell this story at the national level and make people care. And then I was like, oh no, it's me.
I followed that story. It was her immediate supervisor that did all the hiding and cutting up of her body. And then they all covered it up.
Yes. And they
covered it up.
And that the exact part of it, right, was like, I'm seeing this story of this low-ranking Mexican-American woman who didn't even get looked for, right?
I know.
And I knew in that moment they would have looked for me because I was a much higher status person in
Captain.
That organization, right? Captain, white.
The skin, I understand.
Yeah, even though I didn't have family that would have come looking for me, right? It would have been much easier for them to get away with me disappearing. But
so it's that you were an asset, an invaluable asset.
It's just that I was considered a higher status person in that organization, right? I know I have the story, the background story, and the military story to make people care. And I think This is the hope for September, right? We get this book into the national mass market, that people are going to start caring. People care about what's going on for these cult kids, and people have to start caring about the daughters of America because we're so outnumbered and locked away behind these walls.
Well, I'm glad you're raising the issue of Vanessa Guillen, and I hope people can check on what that story is, because it was really a tragedy. It was real, her life was taken. Her whole family are activists on this topic now. They were thrust into the spotlight with no choice. So that's wonderful. Yeah. Okay. Now, regarding, female in the military, I thought the quote was really powerful. Women were considered scaled down men. Now,
yes,
amazing. Oh, that's so little carbon copies of lesser people, huh?
I mean, and when you think about it, that's kind of what it is, right? If you're telling people these women are your equal, but they're not good enough to do the things you do, they're not good enough for us to even train them and let them try, then of course you're actually programming people that they are lesser humans than you. One of your main jobs as a woman in the military is to make everyone forget that you're a woman so that they'll let you do your job.
And you did, because you could pass all of the physical tests with flying colors.
I mean, I tried so hard, but I look very much like a girl. I realized years later, by jumping higher and running faster and trying to prove that I'm not one of those women. Yeah. I was only proving kind of their game, right? It was too easy for people that knew me to be like, oh, women can't hack it in combat. I mean, Captain Mestyanek is an exception. So even in that way, it was just this realization of you cannot win in a game that was designed for you to lose, right?
I know. I mean, it's ironic, right? It's a trap. It's a trap because by going for the gold like you did, your accomplishments are astounding. Just putting that aside, but what didn't you accomplish? It was just that playing the game enables the whole thing to continue. It really is. You articulate well the conundrum of the whole situation in the Army. You do. It was an eye-opener for me because I never really have had any exposure to someone who's been in the military, even though my grandfather and my father were military. I didn't grow up with them. So this was a really good enlightenment for regular folks like me.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, right, doing these interviews or having the book come out now, because the combat ban went down in 2013. Now we've had almost a decade of women in combat. We've had, for example, recently there was the 101st woman ranger graduated. And I was able to pass all the tests for it when I was in the military, but legislatively I was not allowed to go try.
Damn.
So there's this really important part of culture change where the legislation, the bans, the requirements, those are really crucial. So I don't also want it to be some people still have to play the game, right? And I'm so proud of all the super strong women that are playing the game now, because that's the only way we kind of equalize it and change things. I do believe, just like you can't be a Black person in America without experiencing trauma, I do believe that you can't be a woman in this masculine dominated, misogynistic, in its systems organization without having trauma.